Chapter 65. A storm, my God, give me mediocrity. Mirabeau, his mind was engrossed. He only half answered the eager tenderness that she showed to him. He remained gloomy and taciturn. He had never seemed so great and so adorable in Mathilde's eyes. She was apprehensive of some subtle twist of his pride which would spoil the whole situation. She saw the Abbé Pierre come to the hotel nearly every morning. Might not Julien have divined something of her father's intentions through him? Might not the Marquis himself have written to him in a momentary caprice? What was the explanation of Julien's stern manner following on so great a happiness? She did not dare to question. She did not dare. She, Mathilde. From that moment her feelings for Julien contained a certain vague and unexpected element which was almost panic. This arid soul experienced all the passion possible in an individual who has been brought up amid that excessive civilization which Paris so much admires. Early on the following day Julien was at the house of the Abbé Pierre. Some post-horses were arriving in the courtyard with a dilapidated chaise which had been hired at a neighboring station. A vehicle like that is out of fashion, said the stern abbé to him morosely. Here are 20,000 francs which M. de la Mole makes you a gift of. He insists on your spending them within a year, but at the same time wants you to try to look as little ridiculous as possible. The priest regarded flinging away so substantial a sum on a young man as simply an opportunity for sin. The Marquis adds this. Julien de la Verneuil will have received this money from his father, whom it is needless to call by any other name. De la Verneuil will perhaps think it proper to give a present to M. Sorel, a carpenter of Verrières, who cared for him in his childhood. I can undertake that commission, added the abbé. I have at last prevailed upon M. de la Mole to come to a settlement with that Jesuit, the Abbé de Frilair. His influence is unquestionably too much for us. The complete recognition of your high birth on the part of this man, who is in fact the governor of B, will be one of the unwritten terms of the arrangement. Julien could no longer control his ecstasy. He embraced the abbé. He saw himself recognized. For shame, said M. Pierre, pushing him away. What is the meaning of this worldly vanity? As for Sorel and his sons, I will offer them in my own name a yearly allowance of 500 francs, which will be paid to each of them as long as I am satisfied with them. Julien was already cold and haughty. He expressed his thanks, but in the vaguest terms which bound him to nothing. Could it be possible, he said to himself, that I am the natural son of some great nobleman who was exiled to our mountains by the terrible Napoleon? This idea seemed less and less improbable every minute. My hatred of my father would be a proof of this. In that case, I should not be an unnatural monster after all. A few days after this soliloquy, the 15th Regiment of Hussars, which was one of the most brilliant in the army, was being reviewed on the parade ground of Strasbourg. The Chevalier de la Verneuil set the finest horse in Alsace, which had cost him 6,000 francs. He was received as a lieutenant, though he had never been sub-lieutenant except on the rolls of a regiment of which he had never heard. His impassive manner, his stern and almost malicious eyes, his pallor, and his invariable self-possession founded his reputation from the very first day. Shortly afterwards his perfect and calculated politeness, and his skill at shooting and fencing, of which, though without any undue ostentation, he made his comrades aware, did away with all idea of making fun of him openly. After hesitating for 5 or 6 days, the public opinion of the regiment declared itself in his favor. This young man has everything, said the facetious old officers, except youth. Julien wrote from Strasbourg to the old cure of Verrières, M. Julien, who is now verging on extreme old age. You will have learnt, with a joy of which I have no doubt, of the events which have induced my family to enrich me. Here are 500 francs, which I request you to distribute quietly, and without any mention of my name, among those unfortunate ones who are now poor, as I myself was once, and whom you will doubtless help as you once helped me. Julien was intoxicated with ambition, and not with vanity. He nevertheless devoted a great part of his time to attending to his external appearance. His horses, his uniform, his orderlies' liveries, were all kept with a correctness which would have done credit to the punctiliousness of a great English nobleman. He had scarcely been made a lieutenant as a matter of favor, and that only 2 days ago. Then he began to calculate that if he was to become commander-in-chief at 30, like all the great generals, then he must be more than a lieutenant at 23 at the latest. He thought about nothing except fame and his S.O., and it was in the midst of the ecstasies of the most rainless ambition that he was surprised by the arrival of a young valet from the Hôtel de la Mole, who had come with a letter. "All is lost," wrote Mathilde to him. "Rush here as quickly as possible. Sacrifice everything. Desert, if necessary. As soon as you have arrived, wait for me in a fiacre near the little garden door, near No. of the street. I will come and speak to you. I shall perhaps be able to introduce you into the garden. All is lost, and I am afraid there is no way out. Count on me. You will find me staunch and firm in adversity. I love you." A few minutes afterwards, Julien obtained a furlough from the colonel and left Strasbourg at full gallop. But the awful anxiety which devoured him did not allow him to continue this method of travel beyond Metz. He flung himself into a post-chaise and arrived with an almost incredible rapidity at the indicated spot, near the little garden door of the Hôtel de la Mole. The door opened, and Mathilde, oblivious of all human conventions, rushed into his arms. Fortunately, it was only 5 o'clock in the morning, and the street was still deserted. "All is lost. My father, fearing my tears, left Thursday night. Nobody knows wherefore, but here is his letter. Read it." She climbed into the fiacre with Julien. "I could forgive everything except the plan of seducing you, because you are rich. That unhappy girl is the awful truth. I give you my word of honor that I will never consent to a marriage with that man. I will guarantee him an income of 10,000 francs if he will live far away beyond the French frontiers, or better still, in America. Read the letter which I have just received in answer to the inquiries which I have made. The impudent scoundrel had himself requested me to write to Madame de Rênal. I will never read a single line you write concerning that man. I feel a horror for both Paris and yourself. I urge you to cover what is bound to happen with the utmost secrecy. Be frank, have nothing more to do with the vile man, and you will find again the father you have lost." "Where is Madame de Rênal's letter?" said Julien coldly. "Here it is. I did not want to shew it to you before you were prepared for it. Letter, my duties to the sacred cause of religion and morality oblige me, monsieur, to take the painful course which I have just done with regard to yourself. An infallible principle orders me to do harm to my neighbor at the present moment, but only in order to avoid an even greater scandal. My sentiment of duty must overcome the pain which I experience. It is only too true, monsieur, that the conduct of the person about whom you ask me to tell you the whole truth may seem incredible or even honest. It may possibly be considered proper to hide or to disguise part of the truth. That would be in accordance with both prudence and religion. But the conduct about which you desire information has been in fact reprehensible to the last degree, and more than I can say. Poor and greedy as the man is, it is only by the aid of the most consummate hypocrisy, and by seducing a weak and unhappy woman, that he has endeavored to make a career for himself and become someone in the world. It is part of my painful duty to add that I am obliged to believe that Julien has no religious principles. I am driven conscientiously to think that one of his methods of obtaining success in any household is to try to seduce the woman who commands the principal influence. His one great object, in spite of his show of disinterestedness and his stock in trade of phrases out of novels, is to succeed in doing what he likes with the master of the household and his fortune. He leaves behind him unhappiness and eternal remorse, etc., etc., etc. This extremely long letter, which was almost blotted out by tears, was certainly in Madame de Rênal's handwriting. It was even written with more than ordinary care. "I cannot blame M. de la Mole," said Julien, after he had finished it. "He is just and prudent. What father would give his beloved daughter to such a man? Adieu." Julien jumped out of the fiacre and rushed to his post-chaise, which had stopped at the end of the street. Mathilde, whom he had apparently forgotten, took a few steps as though to follow him, but the looks she received from the tradesmen, who were coming out on the thresholds of their shops, and who knew who she was, forced her to return precipitately to the garden. Julien had left for Verrières. During that rapid journey, he was unable to write to Mathilde as he had intended. His hand could only form illegible characters on the paper. He arrived at Verrières on a Sunday morning. He entered the shop of the local gunsmith, who overwhelmed him with congratulations on his recent good fortune. It constituted the news of the locality. Julien had much difficulty in making him understand that he wanted a pair of pistols. At his request, the gunsmith loaded the pistols. The 3 peals sounded. It is a well-known signal in the villages of France, and after the various ringings in the morning announces the immediate commencement of Massachusetts, Julien entered the new church of Verrières. All the lofty windows of the building were veiled with crimson curtains. Julien found himself some spaces behind the pew of Madame de Renal. It seemed to him that she was praying fervently. The sight of the woman whom he had loved so much made Julien's arm tremble so violently that he was at first unable to execute his project. "I cannot," he said to himself. "It is a physical impossibility." At that moment the young priest, who was officiating at the Mass, rang the bell for the elevation of the host. Madame de Renal lowered her head, which, for a moment, became entirely hidden by the folds of her shawl. Julien did not see her features so distinctly. He aimed a pistol shot at her and missed her. He aimed a second shot. She fell.